less stressed. So let's go ahead and dig in. Kathryn, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go ahead and jump into your slides.
All
I'll
right.
go ahead and keep my eye on the time and make sure that our audience's
We're
questions are being
moving.
answered.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. My name's Kathryn. I'm a speech pathologist. And this is one of my favorite topics to discuss because 0 to 3 and like looking in the comments, we have so many children. You have so many children under 2.5, and there's so much going on in terms of language, motor, cognition, and it's overwhelming. So let's just dive right in and we'll get started. And then if you have any questions, as Christy said, just throw them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. Okay. So let's talk about language development. Language development doesn't begin when children start talking, like using first words. Children start communicating from birth, right? So those early cries, the sounds, that's their way of saying, I need something or I'm uncomfortable. So those are like the simple forms of communication, and these lay the groundwork for the next steps. So then when we think of language, we want to think of receptive or understanding of language, and then expressive, how we use language. So I always state that you need a solid understanding of language, your receptive language, in order to have meaningful expressive language, because otherwise you're using language not in a meaningful way, right? So we don't want to just focus on having children use words and language and pointing and gesturing if it's not like understood and there's not that meaning behind it, because otherwise it's just not functional for them. So really focusing on the comprehension, the receptive, because that is the base of language. Okay, so how children communicate. Every child has their own way of communicating. So these are just some examples here. So it's important to like tune into how your child communicates, right? So some children will use a lot of facial expressions and affects. Some will, be like pulling you to show you. And I think taking a step back and watching your child and see what is their communication preference, and it's going to constantly change too. So again, like nothing really happens completely linearly, so just know that things kind of go like this as it goes on. So one day maybe your child is making a lot of sounds, and maybe the next day they're using more facial expressions or pointing or grabbing. And that's totally typical, right? We want to see them experimenting with different ways of communication. So then why children communicate? I mean, so when they start really young, right, they're communicating to get their needs met, right? And to express displeasure, pleasure, when they're hungry, when they are scared, things like that. So then as children develop, their communicative functions expand as well. Okay, so let's talk about that, like understanding the receptive piece of language. So I want to start with, we want to make sure children are hearing, right? Because so many times with young children, babies, um, you you see they're not really responding to sounds as much. There may be fluid in the ear. There may be a hearing component. So I want to start with like hearing is the foundation of it. So we want that attention and listening, right? We need them to see, how are they responding? Are they looking at their caregiver? Are they turning to the sound that's made? Are they looking around? It's how are they engaging in their environment? Okay, so this is a little bit wordy, but this is a guideline of language development. So it goes from 0 to 3 and beyond. So this is provided to you in your handout as well. But this is kind of the guideline for the next few slides. So let's get started at the pre-linguistic skills. So these are the skills before your child is really using words. So this is another building block, right? So everything is going to build upon each other. So is the child attending to the others? Are they using sounds and words to express themselves? Not words, sorry, sounds, gestures, social. Are they playing? How are they engaging in their environment? And also, so I'm just looking at the message. Yeah, we will email that to you. Um, Also, we want to really make sure that we're fostering this by following what the child is interested in here. And that will be a common theme throughout the entire presentation. So just to support the pre-linguistic skills is really to just engage and establish like a trusting relationship with your child. So these are just some building blocks, playing little like peekaboo anticipatory games, smiling, acknowledging that you understand when they're bringing you to something. So you have that really strong relationship. Okay, so how to support it? Play, just like, and play can look different from moment to moment, child to child, and really just take what they're interested in. And let's go back to, let's think about like an inquiry-based program. So Christy, I'd love for you to share how how Vivvi uses supports pre-linguistic skills.
Yeah, of course. I feel like this is right in our wheelhouse, of course, because these are the ages of children that we serve, and we get to observe them in so many of their developmental phases. I think that the ones that stand out, the purpose of this is that I think it's important to say that children are most receptive in things that they're most interested in, right? So when she was just talking about like the inquiry based, right? If children are really excited about a new toy or a new child or a new book, right? Like those are things that we want to really foster because they're excited about it. And so making sure that we're using those tools and those observations to kind of take our next steps with children. So for example, one thing that we might really do, especially in a young toddler, older infant room, is really focus on taking turns, right? Modeling the language that we're going to be using with children. If there's a toy that two children like, we may encourage them to share with another child, right? So they're building a connection. And I think, Kathryn, you just mentioned connection is so important, whether it's child to child or teacher to child. So helping them take turns, using the language around that, modeling how that looks. There's a couple other things. You'll always see that our teachers of this age group have great expressions, right? So they're always smiling, they're always enthusiastic, and they're doing that to form that connection with the children and for them to actually see what reactions and expressions look like. I think another great thing that we have in our classrooms is we always have mirrors. Mirrors for children to see their own expressions are really important. So I would say that those are like the key components. So, modeling the language, making sure that we're encouraging peer-to-peer interactions by modeling it, and then having a lot of teacher to child expressions and acknowledging each other through expressions. One of the other things that I think is really cool is when children notice something and then they look at their teacher, right? So they'll see something, they'll look at their teacher and their teacher will smile back. Yep, you just did it, Kathryn. Their teacher will smile back, and there's like this one-on-one connection that is really great between the teacher and the child. And those connections are just so, so important to children understanding how they should be reacting to certain situations.
Thank you so much. That's very valuable. So why do we play to foster communication and language development? So children, play is communication, right? It's like that cause and effect, right? Like I'm rolling a ball to you, you're bringing it back to me. It's that back and forth exchange of ideas. So you don't need to be using words to be communicating, just as Christy said, you
Mm-hmm.
could be looking, you could be sharing attention, you could be responding with the big facial expressions. You can be handing something to them. It's a reciprocal exchange. And again, using what the child finds fun and motivating. And usually this isn't real toys at like the younger ages. It's usually like, kitchen supplies or anything you don't want them to be playing with typically. Um, so let's just touch upon quickly how do we set up an environment for a child to play? Well, first, we want it to be safe, right? And we want the child to be able to explore while being safe. And we want it, less is more here, right? We don't want to put so much in front of them that they're like, it's hard for them to make a decision. It's hard for them to focus on what they're going for. And then you can also, see what they're interested in that day and then, or like that week, and then see how they play with it, right? Maybe it's bowls, right? And they're like dumping bowls with things in it. Maybe it's going over to a mirror and looking at themselves. And that play also is a giant mess when children are young. And that's just something that it's uncomfortable, but the more engaged they are, like from like touch and like their whole body, the more like language and play you'll see. Okay. So again, this reciprocal relationship of play and communication, this begins prior to when you hear your child's first words, right? So I cry, I get a bottle, or you change my diaper, or you like soothe me to sleep. So that's like the the lowest level, and then it begins more like I'm pointing, you know what I want, I'm pulling you, I'm making sounds, you're playing a game with me, we're playing peekaboo. So this is all communication. Okay, so how do we support these pre-linguistic skills? First, just play and have fun. And again, like being so animated and showing that you're interested too, and have fun. Like try your best to be present and enjoy what you're doing. And like the more you're enjoying it and the more you're enjoying your child, they'll feel your energy there and they'll respond. So again, it's about that connection and that relationship there. Um, Take turns, right? So giving the child the opportunity to respond to your expression is really important. And it's giving them cues too. Get face to face, right? If you're all the way up here and they're down there, it's going to be really hard to exchange ideas and play and communicate. So then once we have babbling, just imitate their babble and then give them a pause and give them an opportunity. Imitate their facial expressions, imitate what they do with their body. Oh, we can't hear. So this is an example of imitating babbling. Let's see if we can just get the sound, or if not, but you can see visually here, right? The baby's babbling and the caregiver's responding, and the baby's responding very enthusiastically, like, you're speaking my language, you understand me. And so you can see that reciprocal. Again, being face to face, acknowledging who or what has caught their attention. A lot of times it's people, right? Because that's what they're familiar with and who they trust. Okay, so here, observe, wait, listen. This is the whole like guideline I give to parents, right? Don't always be talking or doing. You want to find what your child is interested in, what they're trying to communicate, and what they're telling you. And it's going to be really hard to do that if you're having like your own agenda, so to speak, and just giving them like, oh, here's this, oh, open, close. So observe. Less is more. Take a step back. Wait, allow your child the time to see what they do with it, see how they respond to different activities, toys, and people. And then when they do communicate or make facial expressions or babble, any kind of communication, acknowledge it. Whether you imitate it back, whether you give a big smile or some kind of affirmation, it shows that you understand them and what they're communicating to you is important to you. So this is just kind of showing different examples, right? You're observing, oh, your sock fell off. You're waiting to see what they do, and then you're listening. Like, Dee Dee, that's a kitty, right? I understand.
Kathryn, I actually had a situation happen while I was at a campus on Tuesday, and a little child who was developing their speech kept saying "baba," and I would have assumed that they wanted a bubba, right, like a bottle, right?
Mhm.
And I said, "Show me what you're talking about," and they pulled me over to a banana, right? So that's kind of a really good case in point of like the assumption that we might know what they might want, but giving them the opportunity to guide the situation and kind of lead us into what they're asking for, not only helped us understand what they were trying to say and how their language is forming, but it also builds their confidence, right? Like, hey, I did it. I actually communicated what I wanted, and they stopped, they listened, and I got what I needed, right? I
Yeah,
got
they
that
understood
banana. So
me.
yeah, it was really cute. So that whole owl example just made a lot of sense when I thought about that
See, that's
experience
a
the other
great
day.
example.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to point out what you did is so great there, because if you were to just, kind of like give different things or try to figure, like just throw ideas or solutions,
Mm-hmm.
it would be frustrating for the child.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But giving them that space and observing and waiting, they were successful,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
able
and
to.
the encouragement, right? Like I kept saying, "Show me what you're trying to tell me, right? Show
Mhm.
me." And they took my hand and showed me bananas.
They know what they want.
Yeah, and
So again,
imagine how frustrating that is, right? When they can't communicate it. So giving them the minute to show that is great.
yeah. And again, like this coincides so well, just being tuned in to what is going on in the environment and seeing, encouraging it too, right? Giving the
Hmm.
opportunity to start that interaction and carry it out, and then responding by, in this instance, giving them the banana.
Hmm.
So we'll touch a little bit on milestones, but I just want to say that all children develop at their own pace, and these milestones are a general idea, and that development is never linear. And you'll see as children are working really hard, maybe when they're motor milestones, then their communication may not be as strong at that point because there's so much going on in these early years of life, and they can only allocate so many resources at a time while developing. Okay, so the first words, this is really exciting. Um, and it can, it's usually familiar people or objects, and they're usually, like baba, right? And baba may represent a banana in that case, or it may represent a blanket or a person. So they can have the same like word approximation, we'll say, for many different actions, objects, people. And this is totally typical. Um, so, and then how to support it, play, right? And then you're also building on that receptive, that understanding of language in a meaningful context, right? So here you're playing telephone, hello, hello, can I order a pizza, right? Then you can like make a pizza, and you're giving more vocabulary for them to understand, because again, we want children to understand more than they can use. Because think about learning a second language. Okay, here's another great one. Interpret. Uh-oh. Okay, the child's communicating. Uh-oh, the milk spilled, right? That's really meaningful. Like, this just happened right here. You're interpreting it and you're expanding on it, and you're giving them more language for them to comprehend. Okay, commenting. Right? So a child who may say, we'll go back to the banana. There's a banana here, right? Cut, cut the banana, right? Eat, eat the banana. Just like commenting on what they're saying or what they're doing. And it helps keep the interaction going too. And this you can also do in like a narrating, right? But again, simple language is always better. We don't want to just be like, you stood up, you walked over there, you got just like less is more, and like keep it short and sweet. Again, this is similar to the other one, expand, right? So, and again, a lot of times these aren't full words. So if it's like For look, you can say, look, you have an egg, right? So you're building upon what they've said. Okay, before I get into this picture, I wanted to ask you, Christy, I see, I know what I see in my practice, but you work with so many different students across all your locations at different ages. So what are some developmental stages that you start to see some pauses? And
Yeah. Yeah. I think we see pauses in all different stages of development, right? But I think you're asking specifically about speech development.
mm,
Is that correct?
yeah.
I think we see it. We see it when there's changes in an environment, right? We might see children taking a minute to sit back and take the opportunity to observe what's happening. So sometimes we see that from tying it to home to school, right? There's a new sibling at home. There's a, the house might be moving, right? Their location may be moving, or they're coming into our environment. And so they might even sit back a little bit then and observe and take everything in. And then I would say the most common time we see it is when there's a change in a classroom, right? So children are moving up to a new classroom and they're just taking it all in, they're soaking it all in. And so that's when we see it actually the most. We can also see it when they're working on a new skill. Right. So they might be working on a new skill and there's so much development happening. They have such a big job at this stage that if they're starting to work on their gross motor, right, they're starting to lift themselves up. They might start babbling a little less, right, because their concentration is going on onto a different area. They just have such a big job, right? That's all I can say about that. They have such a big job to, really continue growing and learning that they can't focus on all of it at once, right? And so their concentration might focus on, being able to pull up on that ballet bar versus babbling in that moment at themselves in the mirror that's behind the ballet bar.
Thank you. Yeah, I think again, like as you said, like there's so much going on.
So
And
much going on.
I can't imagine how challenging it is too to navigate all these new skills while simultaneously trying to,
Mm-hmm.
sustain and play. So then this picture, I just love, I always like to talk about bubbles. I think bubbles are magic for children, for young children, for babies, for toddlers. Um, and they're a really great example of play and like that reciprocal communication of that cause and effect. And you can really do like and then blow it or pop. So I always like to highlight that. And it,
Bubbles are magical in our
yeah.
campuses as
And
well.
it's something so easy. Like I always have bubbles in my bag
Yeah, yeah.
everywhere. And my
And one
friends
of my
make
camp,
fun of me when I show up and they're like, do you have bubbles? I'm like, yeah, of course I do.
yeah.
Um, So let's just talk some things that we're going to try not to do. And we always slip up and that's totally okay. We're learning and we're learning with our children. We just want to really try not to correct them, right? And so there's language development and then there's like the speech sounds, right? So if a child's not saying the word super clearly, that's okay. Like that's totally okay. It has meaning. They're saying something and that it'll get more precise and clear with time. So we just want them to feel like when they use words or like any kind of communication pointing that and they're successful, we don't want to correct them and have them keep, say, look, right? Like, let's try not to do that because it's discouraging. So I really like this visual. Development's never linear, right? So even like us, like as adults, we're never going straight up, right? There are always twists and turns, bends in the road. So especially for young children, we always want to think, well, they were using these words last week and now this week I haven't heard this, right? This is really what it's looking like. They may be working hard again, like in their gross motor, they may be going through a change, they may be going to a new program, their sleep schedule may have changed. They don't have a sleep sack anymore, right? So there's so many factors in their development and that I would be concerned if it's completely linear like that, to be honest, because progress really isn't. And you want to see that ebb and flow with it too. So let's go on to two words quickly. So it's very similar to one word. So you're going to comment and expand, again, just building upon what the child is saying. And then how to encourage it. Again, letting them lead, right? Using the owl approach. And repetition is really good too, right? And especially when it's in a meaningful environment like play or an everyday activity. Again, you'll see a lot of play going on here. So like elaborate on play, right? And this again is giving it so much context too. And it's also, you're seeing a glimpse into the child's world, right? Like this is what they think when they go to the doctor or what they think when they go to the grocery store. So it's a really nice look into their world too. Um, so here again is a really good example of how words or like word combinations have different meanings. So, daddy shoes or daddy shoes, put my shoes on, and then I'm wearing daddy shoes. So it's up, you have to, again, like be tuned in to your child to figure out the context and what the meaning is. Okay, so again, we really want to let our child lead. And I love the quote, children who lead get the language they need, because when you know what their motivation and their like desire is, then you're going to provide them with with language that is related to that. Otherwise, we're just kind of like guessing and throwing language at them. So really following what they're interested in. Okay, and then again, children know when you're trying to get them to say a word or just talk. So I would say try not to and just try to play with them and see what happens, right? And we want them to feel successful when they communicate and they're having fun. So we don't want to, say this, say that. Um, so this is a great example. We don't want to do on the left. Is that a spoon? Say spoon, right? And then mom's modeling it in play. Again, you can keep expanding and you'll see more vocabulary during play. It's very meaningful, and everyday routines too is another really great opportunity. I always say you are the greatest toy your child has, because you have that affect, that engagement, that relationship with your child. So again, like don't feel pressure like, oh, I need to get this one. I saw this one on Instagram. This child is using it like this. No, like a tuned in caregiver is more valuable than any toy activity on the market. Yeah, again, supporting your child is, it looks similar. It's just expanding upon what they say. And I think music is another really great thing to highlight here. So adding music into um, more complex play, right? Reading. Okay, so this quote is, this is how children learn and develop. And play is a human right too, right? We need children to play so they can understand how the world functions around them and how they how they have a role and what it means. So there's never too much playtime, and play may not always look what we think of play. Play could just mean, you know, moving to something, pulling up on a ballet bar, knocking on a mirror, pushing something down. Okay, so then the popcorn quote that I always try to come back to. So it's really hard, right? When you have other children and your children are around other kids, and especially with social media and you see posts and reels and all of that. But I always say all popcorn is prepared in the same pot. It's in the same heat with the same oil, but the kernels don't pop at the same time, right? So try not to compare your child to other children, especially their siblings or family members, because they're going to pop at their own time. Okay. So that was a lot for everyone to take in. Preparing with me, but now let's try to flush it
Yeah,
out.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Kathryn. That was really wonderful. And just a reminder, if anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat box. We do have some pre-submitted questions, though, that I'm going to start asking Kathryn while anybody else takes a moment to write something in the chat box. So thank you so much, Kathryn. That was just really valuable. So I think I said at the beginning, I have a 4 and a 9-year-old, and my 4-year-old is kind of through this stage, but it makes a lot of sense to be able to listen to all of your feedback. So one question that parents have, and there's a version of this in multiple ways, is how the child communicates at home versus with their caregiver or childcare provider. And so, for example, the question is: our child is 13 months and babbles at home, but rarely babbles at daycare. How can we encourage her to speak outside of the home with others? She has always just been kind of a quiet observer, and we'd love her to feel confident enough to speak outside of the home.
Yeah, I think this is something I hear it more often than not. And I think it's also like it's an environmental difference, right? And the child may have, I would maybe more comfortable, right, at home. And
Mhm.
they know that they're going to be understood. They're more set up. And that's not saying that they're not going to be, but it takes time and relationship. So again, it comes back to that relationship and like just repeated experience too. And I would say, try not, again, like try not to correct, right? Try to just like acknowledge and validate what they're saying. And that's really the greatest thing. But I wouldn't it's gonna happen. It's the child's demeanor too, and that's who they are. Um, so
Great. Great, thank you. Another question that has come through is, as a parent, it can be hard to ignore their child's development against another child's development, whether that be something that they see on social media or a development chart, or children that they're comparing themselves to in their own classroom. How do we know if that's our own anxieties or if they are maybe developmentally behind and we might need to take additional steps to provide services?
yeah, I think, it's totally normal to think and compare, especially with seeing everything's at our fingertips right now. So there's a range of development, right? So some children will be um like advanced, some children will be in the middle, some children will linger in stages for longer, and that's all part of development, right? So as long as the child is meeting developmental milestones and progressing, that's okay too. But we also want to think, what is success for a child, right? So we want to think long-term success. And to me, and most of the caregivers and families I work with, it's a happy, healthy, and independent child, right? And some children
Mhm.
have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others, and no child is the same, right? So it's just like your child is like every other person where they're going to excel in some areas and not. But if your child truly isn't meeting milestones, it's best not to ignore them, right? It's best to go chat with an expert and see, is this my anxiety or are they not meeting their milestones? And see, is there cause for concern? Is there an assessment? Because it's better to know, and the earlier you intervene, the better if there is
Great.
something going on.
Great. Thank you. Two questions that just came through the chat, which focus primarily on bilingual household. And so what about children coming from a second language at home? When they are at home, it's one language, but at a school, it might be another language. Is that confusing for the child? And then I'm going to read the second one because it's kind of in line. You can probably answer it all together. We're a bilingual household, but only one parent speaks non-English and has an elementary proficiency. Is it a good idea to speak to our children in both languages? When we're both not super fluent speakers in each, right? So we do want to bring him up with some understanding of the other language, but don't want to impede his development.
Yeah, I think this is very common too. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I wish I was bilingual. I think being bilingual or
Great.
multilingual is a superpower, right? And there's
Mm-hmm.
so much research that shows that being exposed to more than one language is contributing to your child's cognitive flexibility and problem solving and code switching. So I would say if you're speaking like X language at home, speak that, right? And if Y is being spoken at school, speak that. And the child will learn how to switch and when to use the language then. And with that being said, is their development will look different than a child that is exposed to only one language.
Mhm.
Because they have to like decipher which is what, who to use what language when. Um, but even if you start noticing the child is using one language more in one environment, that's totally normal too, right? It's gonna kind of ebb and flow again, but I would continue this. I would not discourage it at all. Um, and
Yeah.
then
I was going to say that too. I feel like as somebody who leads our campuses, anytime there's any concern about a speech delay, I always ask, is there multiple language being spoken? Are they learning multiple languages? Because that is a lot to process, but at the end, it is so beneficial for the child to be speaking multiple
it's
languages.
it's incredible.
Yeah,
It's
agreed.
truly a superpower. And um yeah, I would keep doing it if you're doing it. And then to the second question, being in a bilingual household, well, one parent speaks, has an elementary proficiency. I would say do what you would do, how you would communicate within the like home as you would if the child was or was not there. If you will communicate using the non-English language, using whatever proficiency you have, then use it. And the child will have an understanding of it too, and then eventually use it. But I
Mhm.
wouldn't, again, if that's meaningful and how your family dynamic is, like go for it, right? And then maybe the child will even take off even further because they're exposed to it so much younger too. So I definitely wouldn't shy away and it will not impede their development. Um, but with that being said, if you notice that a child is having delays in one language, then it may be worth speaking to a professional about, okay, should we just use one or two? But again, it's really challenging for them at like in the beginning, but they're so much better off in the end.
Right. Thank you. There's two more questions that I think are really important to get to, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. But I'm sure your contact information is available in case anybody has any additional questions that we're not getting to. One of them is our child began stuttering at just over 2.5 years old. So many sentences will begin with repetition of the first syllable. Is this something that children typically outgrow, or should it be addressed in any way?
Okay, so this is like at this age too, there's so much language and the language demand is increasing so much. And like again, going back to that receptive and expressive piece, there's so much the child needs to process, right? So they have to understand all of this. And then to express it, you may see some of these stuttering like behaviors, right? The prolongations, the blocks, because they're trying so hard to get all their ideas out that they're still processing what they have to say
Mm-hmm.
as they're expressing it. So I would say this is typical for this age. Um, and again, just things you can do is just like be patient with them, don't interrupt them, right? And then if it continues, I would say past like 4 or 5, and you see more of like that, like struggle to get it out, then I would go to someone. But again, the demands have increased so much and it's like they have so much they want to say too, while they're still trying to process what to say and how to say it. Um,
They're excited to get those words
yeah.
out, their ideas and thoughts. That's really good advice. And then the last question is what resources are available, or how do we get started when we have to consider getting our child assessed due to a speech delay?
Yeah, I would say the American Speech and Hearing Association, it's ASHA, that is like the governing body for all speech pathologists. They have great milestones and tips and tricks, and it's obviously all evidence-based there. So I would really only go to something like that or like the CDC rather than looking at blogs or things like that. That's more anecdotal in nature. Um, and then, thank you so much, Jessica. And then if you want to get it assessed, you can reach out to a speech pathologist, and you can even just like chat with them first to see if there's warrant for an assessment or if it's still within, if it's still just developmental in nature.
Great. Thank you. We'll
Any
hang on for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes in case anybody else has some
any great
questions to throw in
questions.
the chat box. But hopefully everybody found this really helpful, and the handouts will be sent out along with the copy of this webinar for you to refer back to. But thank you so much for your time today. It was just wonderful being able to present with you, Kathryn. Thank you for joining us, and feel free to throw any last minute questions in there, but otherwise have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining.